Trucker left in 1990 and never returned. 33 years later, his son finds this in his truck. What he found not only changed his life forever, but sent shivers down everyone's spine, revealing the dark secret behind his father's fateful journey. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more chilling stories like this, and drop a comment sharing what you think James found in his father's truck. December 1990, Los Angeles. The alarm clock failed to ring that cold morning of December 22nd. Robert Henderson had been waking up before dawn for 15 years, his body trained to rise even before the first rays of light. But that morning felt different. He woke with a strange tightness in his chest, as though some invisible force pressed down on his heart. He lingered in bed for a while, listening to Mary's deep, steady breathing beside him, and the distant sounds of Los Angeles slowly stirring to life. From outside came the faint toll of church bells from St. John's Cathedral, marking 5 in the morning. In the next room, his son James slept soundly, clutching a toy car Robert had given him last Christmas. "It's just nerves," Robert muttered to himself as he sat up slowly. But nerves didn't explain why he'd dreamed of his dead father who had whispered words he couldn't quite recall. They didn't explain the metallic tang of fear that clung to his mouth. Mary stirred under the covers as he rose half asleep, mumbling something about the cold before curling deeper into the blankets. Robert paused for a moment, his eyes tracing the soft cascade of her brown hair on the pillow, the way her lips curved gently upward as she dreamed. The morning routine in the kitchen calmed him. He fired up the gas stove and set the water to boil for the cinnamon-sweetened coffee that filled the small kitchen of their modest home in Boyle Heights. Soon, the smell of cinnamon and brown sugar filled the air. Mary shuffled in, wearing her old flannel nightgown, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Leaving so early, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Robert had to reach San Diego before noon to unload the Coca-Cola shipments meant for the holiday festivities. It was his final run of the year, the one that would bring in extra cash for the kids' gifts and cover their mounting debts. "It's the last trip before Christmas," Robert told her while she wrapped his refried bean tacos for the road. "Tomorrow I'll be back to help you with James's Christmas party." Mary nodded, but Robert caught an uneasy look in her eyes that hadn't been there before. When he asked her about it, she only shrugged. "I don't know, Robert. I had a strange dream last night. I dreamed you left and never came back. That James and I were waiting by the window and you never came." Robert finished chuckling, though even he could hear how hollow his laugh sounded. "Don't be silly, sweetheart. I've made this run hundreds of times. I know that highway like the back of my hand." But as he spoke, the stories he'd heard at the depot drifted back to him. Stories of hijackings of trucks vanishing without a trace, of families left waiting for fathers who never made it home. Violence had been on the rise these past few months. The gangs were tightening their grip on the roads, and some truckers had started traveling in convoys for safety. Robert had thought about taking the old back road instead of the freeway, but that would mean arriving late and possibly losing the contract. His company, Regio Montana Transport, was merciless about delays, especially around the holidays. When he finished his coffee, Robert went to say goodbye to James. The boy was fast asleep, a smile on his face. Robert leaned close and whispered, "I'm bringing you something special from San Diego, son. Something you've been asking for." James shifted slightly in his sleep, but didn't wake. Robert tucked the blanket around him and walked out of the room, his throat tight. In the driveway, his navy blue Kenworth with gold pinstripes waited a sleeping giant ready to hit the road. Robert had bought that second-hand truck 3 years earlier after spending 15 years as a company driver. It was his pride and joy, his lifeline, his home away from home, and the dream he'd built from scratch. On the driver's door, he'd had the words R. Henderson and Sons painted, picturing the day when James would be old enough to ride shotgun. He checked the tires, brakes, and oil. Everything was in perfect order. He fired up the engine, the diesel's low growl waking a few neighbors, though they were used to it by now. Robert always left before dawn. Mary came out to see him off, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a few breakfast burritos wrapped in a clean cloth. She handed him a fresh St. Christopher medal for protection on the road, pressing it onto the dashboard next to the others. Robert reached for his rosary dangling from the rearview mirror and crossed himself. "I'll be back tomorrow for dinner," he promised, kissing her on the lips with a tenderness that surprised them both. "I'll tell James his dad always keeps his promises." It was 4:30 a.m. when Robert Henderson left his modest home in East LA, merging onto the I-5 southbound. In his rearview mirror, the lights of Los Angeles faded, unaware this would be the last time he'd see his hometown. The highway stretched empty, save for a few early morning truckers like himself. He tuned the radio to a Spanish station that played José Alfredo Jiménez songs. El Camino de Guanajuato filled the cab as he headed toward his destination, humming along and thinking about the gifts he'd bring back for James from San Diego. He couldn't have known it would be his last song, his last sunrise on the road, his final journey as Robert Henderson, the trucker who always made it home. Los Angeles, January 1991. Mary woke up on December 23rd with a heavy certainty that something was wrong. Robert had promised to be back in time for James's Christmas party, and he never broke a promise to his son. She peered out the window, hoping to see the blue Kenworth parked in the driveway, but only empty space and the stillness of the morning greeted her. "Mom, where's Dad?" James asked, shuffling into the kitchen in his Superman pajamas, eyes puffy from sleep. "He said we'd have the Christmas party together." Mary forced a smile that didn't fool anyone. "He probably got delayed in San Diego, honey. You know how crazy the holidays get, so much traffic, so many deliveries." But as she scrambled the eggs, an icy dread crept down her spine. Whenever Robert was late, he always called without fail. Even when there wasn't a phone nearby, he'd find a way to send word through another driver. December 24th came and went without a single message. Mary called Reggio Montana Transport, but the office was closed for the holidays. On the 25th, while families all over the neighborhood celebrated Christmas, Mary and James waited by the window. The boy had drawn a picture for his dad, a blue truck with two stick figures holding hands, him and Robert. "Do you think he forgot my present?" James asked that night, his voice trembling. Mary hugged him tight, feeling her world collapse. "Your dad would never forget you, sweetheart. Never." On January 2nd, 1991, Mary finally reached the supervisor at Reggio Montana, Stephen Villarreal, an older man whose tired voice confirmed her worst fear. Robert had made his delivery in San Diego on December 23rd at 11 a.m. He'd signed the paperwork, collected his pay, and according to the warehouse clerk had mentioned he was in a hurry to get home for his son's party. "Mrs. Henderson," Mr. Villarreal said solemnly after that, "we lost contact. He should have checked in when he left San Diego, but he never did. We've asked at the toll booths and gas stations, nobody's seen him." Mary felt the floor crumble beneath her. What does that mean? What could have happened to him? Mr. Villarreal sighed heavily. "Ma'am, I don't want to alarm you, but there's been a rise in hijackings on that route. 2 weeks ago, 3 truckers were hit on the San Diego-Los Angeles freeway. One was found beaten in a ditch. The other 2, well, they're still missing." That same afternoon, Mary scraped together what little money they had left and headed to the Greyhound station. With James's small hand in hers, she traveled to San Diego. The boy kept asking if they'd find Dad, and Mary had no answers. In San Diego, Mary scoured hospitals, morgues, and police stations. Everywhere she went, the answer was the same. "Ma'am, a lot of trucks disappear on these highways. There's a lot of bandit activity. If you want to file a report, we'll need to fill out some paperwork, but honestly, the odds aren't good." Sergeant Raul Medina, a middle-aged cop with a thick mustache, met her in his cluttered, smoke-filled office. "Look, Mrs. Henderson, I'll be straight with you. So far this year, we've received over 20 reports of missing truckers. Out of those, we've found 5. 3 were dead. 2 were alive, but barely. The rest, well, they just vanished." Mary felt her breath catch. "But my husband is a good man. He works hard. He never looked for trouble. Ma'am, these guys don't care if someone's good or bad. They see a truck loaded with valuable cargo and they strike. Your husband was hauling soda, right? Around the holidays, that stuff is like gold. They sell it along the coast in small towns. It's easy money. Back in Los Angeles, Mary sold her sewing machine and hired the private investigator her neighbor had recommended. Arthur Mendoza was a retired state police officer who'd left the force after being wounded in a shootout. He had connections all over the country and knew the tricks criminals used. Mrs. Henderson, he told her in his cramped downtown LA office, "I'll look into it, but you need to understand how it is out there. Truckers are easy targets. They get ambushed, the cargo's taken, and sometimes, well, no witnesses. If your husband fought back, if he tried to protect his rig—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Mary understood. Mr. Mendoza promised to comb through the entire route, talk to other drivers, and check hospitals and morgues from San Diego to Los Angeles. He charged $100 a week, a small fortune for Mary, but she was willing to sell everything they had. While Mr. Mendoza worked his leads, Mary picked up extra shifts. She sewed clothes in the mornings, cleaned houses in the afternoons, and sold tamales in Boyle Heights weekend markets. James pitched in however he could, helping carry pots and watching the stand while she served customers. "When's Dad coming home?" the boy would ask every night before bed. "Soon, baby, very soon," Mary would whisper, holding him until he fell asleep. But the weeks dragged on, and Mr. Mendoza's news only brought more heartache. He'd found a few witnesses who remembered seeing the blue Kenworth at a gas station in Chula Vista the afternoon of December 23rd. The attendant remembered Robert because he'd asked for the quickest way back to LA and bought a large soda and a pack of cookies. He was in a hurry, the man recalled. Said he had to make it home for his kid's Christmas party. He seemed happy, whistling while he filled up the tank. That was the last time anyone saw Robert Henderson alive. After Chula Vista, the truck and its driver vanished like mist on a hot highway, leaving behind only questions and the shattered hearts of a family that would never stop waiting. Los Angeles, 1991 to 1993. Arthur Mendoza had followed every lead. He'd driven the San Diego-LA route 3 times. He'd talked to hundreds of truckers. He'd checked every ditch, every side road, every place a rig might have gone off the road or been hidden. The $100 a week that Mary paid him had become an impossible burden. Mrs. Henderson, the detective, told her at their final meeting, his voice heavy with regret, "I've done everything I could. Robert and his truck vanished like the ground just swallowed them up. I'm so sorry." Mary received the news in silence with 10-year-old James at her side. The boy no longer asked when Dad would be home. He'd learned that sometimes questions have no answers, or at least not the ones he wanted to hear. Without Robert's income, and after draining their savings on the search, Mary had to reinvent herself. She turned the living room of their small home into a sewing workshop. She worked from 5 in the morning until 11 at night, mending jeans, making dresses for quinceañeras, embroidering napkins for the neighbors. Her hands grew calloused and her eyes ached from sewing under the yellow glare of a bare bulb. On weekends, Mary and James made sweet and savory tamales. The boy had learned to spread the masa with the precision of an adult, and together they'd head to the local street markets to sell their goods. Hot tamales, fresh tamales. James would shout, his adolescent voice cracking with effort. Get 'em while they're hot. Over those years, James grew into the man of the house while still being a boy. He helped his mother with the finances, looked after the house when she ran deliveries, and studied under that same dim light where Mary stitched late into the night. His grades were top-notch, as though he wanted to honor the memory of a father who might never come home. Your dad always wanted you to study, Mary would say when she saw him poring over his books. He didn't want you out there on the highways like he was. He said you'd be an engineer or a doctor, someone important. James nodded, but secretly he dreamed of trucks. He drew big rigs in the margins of his notebooks, memorized makes and models he saw rumbling down the avenue, and planned that one day he'd get his own commercial driver's license. Maybe then, on some lonely stretch of highway, he'd find the blue Kenworth and see his dad waiting, arms open. In 1998, when James turned 15, Mary threw a modest celebration in their backyard. Neighbors pitched in with homemade chili and cold sweet tea, and Joe, a seasoned trucker who'd known Robert well, brought the boy a small replica of his father's Kenworth, handcrafted by a local artisan. "Your dad was a man of his word," Joe told James, his eyes glistening with emotion. "If he didn't come back, it's because something terrible happened. But know this, he loved you more than his own life." That night, James wept for the first time in years. He cried for the father he barely remembered, for the conversations they'd never have, for the trips they'd never take, for the driving lessons he'd always imagined. College years came powered by scholarships and part-time jobs. James pursued mechanical engineering at Cal State Los Angeles, focusing on diesel engines and transportation systems. His classmates thought it was a random choice, but he knew that every bolt he tightened, every motor he rebuilt was his way of keeping Robert Henderson alive. In 2005, James met Lisa Rufus at a cafe near campus. She was studying to become an elementary school teacher and wore a smile that reminded him of his mother in her younger days. They married in 2007 at St. Patrick's Church, the same one whose bells Robert had heard on that final morning. During the ceremony, James reserved an empty seat in the front row for his father. Just in case he comes back, he told Lisa, who understood without needing an explanation. Robert Jr. was born in 2008, followed by Sophie in 2010. James would tell them stories about the grandfather they'd never met, tales Mary had passed down and that James had polished over the years. He spoke of the fearless trucker who roamed America's highways, the man who worked day and night to build a better life for his family, the father who promised to return, and who James always said was still trying to find his way home. In 2010, Mary passed away from diabetes at the county hospital. Her last words were for Robert. "Tell him I never stopped waiting." She whispered that I never lost faith, and that his boy grew up to be a good man just like he wanted. James inherited the little house in East LA, where the old sewing room had been transformed into a small auto repair shop. He hung his parents' wedding photo on the wall next to the last picture of Robert standing proud beside his blue Kenworth. Every year on December 22nd, James drove to San Diego, tracing the same route his father had taken. It was his own pilgrimage, a way to keep hope alive. He stopped at the same gas stations, ate at the same roadside diners, and asked every veteran trucker he met if they remembered Robert Henderson and his navy blue rig. The answers were always the same. "Sorry, son. I don't recall. That was a long time ago." A lot of drivers disappeared back then. By 2023, James was 40 years old. He'd long stopped believing he'd find his father alive, but he'd never stopped searching. Hope had transformed into a need for closure, a desperate urge to know what really happened that December night in 1990. His kids already knew the story by heart. Robert Jr., now 15, had inherited the family's fascination with trucks and talked about studying transportation engineering. Sophie, 13, had written several essays about her missing grandfather, turning the family tragedy into a quest for justice. Neither of them could have imagined that this 33-year search was about to end. March 2023. The Huentitan Canyon. The call came on a Tuesday morning while James was working on a Ford's transmission at his shop. The phone rang 3 times before he wiped his greasy hands and picked up. "Is this James Henderson?" a formal voice asked on the other end. "Yes, that's me." "Who's calling?" "This is Mr. Morales from the Jalisco State Attorney's Office. Mr. Henderson, we need you to come to our office. We believe we've located your father's vehicle." The world seemed to stop. James felt the air rush from his lungs and had to brace himself against the workbench to keep from collapsing. After 33 years of searching, after thousands of questions with no answers, someone had found something. Are you sure?" James stammered, his voice cracking. "The plates match the report your mother filed back in '91. It's a navy blue 1985 Kenworth. Mr. Henderson, we also found human remains in the cab." September 17, 1989, would mark the longest journey of James's life. Lisa had closed the shop to come with him, holding his hand as they waited in a drab office filled with filing cabinets and the scent of stale coffee. When Mr. Morales, a thin man with thick glasses, finally ushered them in, James had already braced himself for any kind of news. Mr. Henderson. The discovery was purely by chance, Morales explained, spreading a series of photographs across his cluttered desk. A team of spelunkers was exploring the Huentitan Canyon when they stumbled on some metal debris over 100 yards down. At first they thought it was garbage, but as they got closer they realized it was a large vehicle. The photos showed a sight James had imagined countless times, but had never truly believed he'd see. The remains of the blue Kenworth were half buried in thick underbrush, partially hidden by decades of tree growth and landslides. The cab was crushed beyond recognition, but the navy blue paint and the gold pinstripes Robert had chosen with such pride were still visible. How did it end up there? James asked, staring at the images both horrified and awed. From the angle of the wreck and the scarring on the trees, it looks like he went off the road at a sharp curve, probably at night. No one reported an accident, Morales said. The truck rolled down the canyon and got swallowed up by the wilderness. Over the years, mudslides and tree growth all but erased it from view. Bain, the coroner, a grizzled man with a gray beard, joined the conversation. Mr. Henderson, we found skeletal remains in the cab consistent with a male in his 40s. From the condition of the bones and the personal effects inside, we believe it's your father. James nodded, unable to speak. Lisa squeezed his hand tightly. There's something else, Morales continued. The rescue team found something unusual, a metal box welded beneath the driver's seat, completely intact after all these years. It was heavier than you'd expect. About the size of a shoebox, welded with homemade seams, but strong and secure. Your father wanted to make sure that whatever he kept inside would survive anything. Can I open it here? James asked. It's your legal right, Morales replied. It's your family's legacy. It took nearly an hour to open. James had brought tools from his own shop and with painstaking care cut through the welds his father had made decades earlier. Each slice brought him closer to Robert, as if he were unlocking a message that had waited 33 years to be read. When he finally pried the lid open, everyone in the room fell silent. Bundles of cash lay neatly preserved in sealed plastic bags alongside family photos, truck documents, and something that made James break down. A letter, handwritten by Robert with James's name on it in that unmistakable scrawl. Dad knew James, whispered, his voice shaking as he held the letter in trembling hands. He knew something might happen. Morales and the coroner exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen a lot over the years, but Robert Henderson's foresight was remarkable. A man who'd left a message for his son, hoping for the best, but preparing for the worst. If this story is hitting you as hard as it hit us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the end of this incredible journey. And share this video with your family. Everyone's going to want to know what was inside that mysterious box. Comment what you think the letter said. That night, James went home with a storm of grief and relief he didn't know how to untangle. He finally had answers, but he'd also lost the hope that one day Robert might walk through the door. The search was over, but a new chapter was about to unfold. Los Angeles, April 2023. James decided the box should be opened in the house where he'd grown up, right at the kitchen table, where Robert had sipped his last coffee before leaving for San Diego. Lisa made hot chocolate as Robert Jr. and Sophie settled around the old wooden table that had seen so many family moments. "Are you sure you want the kids to be here?" Lisa asked gently, noticing the tightness in her husband's face. "They're part of this story too," James said softly, his fingers tracing the cool metal of the box. "Grandpa wanted this to stay in the family. They have a right to know the kind of man Robert Henderson was." Although the box had already been opened at the state attorney's office, James chose to go through its contents privately back home, where it felt right. With trembling hands, he lifted the lid that had remained sealed for 33 years. The first bundle he pulled out was wrapped in a clear plastic bag with a handwritten note for the new house. December 1990. The bills were a mix of denominations, some dating back to the 80s, others newer. James counted quickly, realizing it was well over $50,000, a small fortune for the Henderson family back then. "Dear God," Lisa murmured. "Where did Robert get all that money, Robert Jr.?" Curious at 15, picked up one of the bills. "Grandpa was rich," he said with wide eyes. "No, son," James replied, his voice catching. He was a man who saved every penny he could. Beneath the money were family photos. James had never seen Robert holding baby. James Mary pregnant and beaming beside the Kenworth, the whole family at a local fair. But what struck James most were pictures of himself he didn't even remember taking. 5-year-old James, sitting in the cab on his father's lap, or napping in the sleeper berth during a quick trip to Bakersfield. "Dad used to take me in the truck," James whispered, holding a photo of himself in his elementary school uniform. He couldn't recall it. Sophie picked up a picture of Robert wearing a cowboy hat. "He looks just like you, Dad," she said, studying her grandfather's features. At the bottom of the box were 3 letters, each marked with a different date. One was addressed to Mary, the second to my son James when he's grown, and the third simply read, "For emergencies, open only if something happens to me." James chose to read the emergency letter first. Robert's handwriting was rough but steady, written in haste but with intention. "If you're reading this, it means my worst fears came true," James read aloud, his voice cracking. "I've been saving this money for 5 years, every penny, because I know the roads are getting more dangerous. Hijackings are on the rise and many drivers don't make it home." James's voice wavered, but he kept going. "This money isn't dirty. It's the sweat of my brow, overtime hours, holiday trips I took so my family could have a better future. I wanted to buy a bigger house, maybe start a small business, a gas station or a repair shop." Lisa stepped closer, resting a comforting hand on James's shoulder as he read on. "If you find me dead, I want you to know I fought. I didn't give up easily. But I also want you to know that every dollar I saved was for you, James, to help you get an education so your mom wouldn't have to work so hard, so our family could have a better life than I ever could give you." Robert Jr. spoke up, his voice small. "Did Grandpa know he was going to die?" "No, son," James said, wiping his tears. "But he knew his job was dangerous, and he wanted to protect us the only way he knew how." The letter for Mary was more intimate, filled with memories of their early days, apologies for the nights he didn't come home because of long hauls, and promises of eternal love. Robert had even explained where he'd hidden important documents and included detailed instructions on how to use the money. But it was the letter for James, written for when he'd be a grown man, that hit the hardest. Robert had written about his dreams for his son, about how he hoped James would be a better man than he'd been, about the importance of education and honest work. "Son," he'd written, "if you're reading this, it means you grew up without me. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to teach you how to drive, to take you to your first day of work, to meet the woman you'd marry. But I want you to know that every mile I drove was for you." At the end of the letter, Robert had added a final note that made James break down completely. "In the secret compartment behind the driver's seat, there's a Christmas present I bought for you in San Diego, a remote control truck you'd been asking for. If you find the truck, it's yours." That night, while his family slept, James sat at the kitchen table, reading and rereading his father's letters. For the first time in 33 years, he felt like Robert had finally come home. Los Angeles, April 2023. Among the letters and money, James found something he'd missed at first, a small spiral notebook, its pages yellowed with time. It was Robert's travel journal, filled with route notes, fuel expenses, diners where he'd eaten, and personal reflections that now read like prophecies. The first entry was dated January 1985, the year Robert bought his Kenworth. "Today, my dream comes true. I'm finally my own boss. James is 2 in 1 day. This will be his too, R. Henderson and Sons. Just like it said on the door." James spent the entire night reading, discovering a father he'd never known. Robert hadn't just logged miles and routes, he'd poured his fears, plans, and worries into those pages. One entry from March 1987 read, "James asked me today why I have to leave so often. I didn't know how to answer. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that Dad works so he can have a better life?" As the years went by, the entries grew darker. In November 1988, Robert wrote, "3 truckers got jumped on the highway between Mexico City and Acapulco this week. They left Don Fermin beaten and bleeding in a ditch. It's not like it used to be, these roads aren't safe anymore." But the entry that shook James the most was dated November 15, 1990, barely a month before his dad disappeared. "Today, I saw Joe get robbed at that curve near Chilpancingo. They took all his cargo and left him lying there like a dog. I had to rush him to the hospital in Iguala. While we were waiting, he said to me, 'Robert, this is getting bad. The cartels are running the roads. I'm not driving through there at night anymore. I'm changing my schedule.'" Lisa, who'd been reading over James's shoulder, whispered, "Your dad knew something bad could happen." "That's not all," James said, flipping through the pages until he reached the final entries. "Look at this." The entry dated December 20th, 1990, revealed Robert's dreams for the future. "I've been saving for 5 years now. Finally have enough for the down payment on that house in the Chapalita neighborhood, the one Mary liked so much. After this run to San Diego, we're going to check it out together. I also want to talk to Mr. Mendoza about opening a gas station on the road to Fresno. With what I've saved plus a bank loan, we could get started next year." Robert Jr., who'd come down for a glass of water, sat next to his father. "Was Grandpa going to stop driving trucks?" "Looks like it, son," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "He had big plans for us." The second-to-last entry, dated December 21st, was even more revealing. "Tomorrow I leave for San Diego. It's my last long haul of the year. Mary doesn't know, but I already told the manager at Regio Montana that starting in January, I'm only taking local runs, no more long trips. I don't want to leave Mary and James alone for days at a time anymore. Business is growing, but family is more important." James's hands trembled as he read the final entry. Dated December 22nd, 1990, just hours before Robert left home for the last time. "Didn't sleep well last night. I had another dream about Dad standing by the truck saying something I couldn't quite make out. Mary had nightmares too. She said she dreamed I didn't make it back. Silly old wives' tales, but I can't shake this feeling in my chest. Today I bought James that remote control truck he's been begging for, one of the expensive ones. It's hidden in the secret compartment of the rig. I'm going to give it to him when I get back. He's going to be so happy. I also bought Mary a pair of silver earrings I saw at a jewelry store in downtown San Diego. She's going to look beautiful in them on New Year's Eve." The entry continued. "If something happens to me on this run, I want you to know that I love you both more than life itself. Every mile I've driven, every dollar I've saved, every sacrifice I've made, it's all been for you. Mary is the kindest woman in the world, and James is my pride. If God decides I'm not coming back, please understand, I always tried to do the right thing." And then in smaller letters, almost like an afterthought, "It's 4 a.m. now. Mary's making coffee. I'll be leaving soon. Holy Mother, keep me safe and bring me home to them. My kids need me." James closed the journal and sat in silence for a long while. He finally understood that his father hadn't been just another victim of random violence. Robert had known the risks, had taken precautions, had even changed his plans to protect his family. But fate had proven stronger than any preparation. Dad knew, James whispered. He knew it was dangerous. But he did it anyway. For us. The next day, James called the state attorney's office to ask if he could return to the place where they'd found the truck. He needed to find that secret compartment, needed to see the last gift Robert had hidden for him 33 years earlier. Huentitan Canyon and Mezquitan Cemetery, Los Angeles. May 2023. Going back to the Huentitan Canyon was harder than James had anticipated. Accompanied by 2 forensic techs and a rescue team, he rappelled once again down to the spot where the remains of the blue Kenworth lay. But this time, he wasn't just a bystander. He had a personal mission to fulfill. The remains of the truck were in even worse shape than he remembered. The cab had been partially dismantled when they recovered Robert's remains, leaving it looking like a rusted skeleton entangled in weeds and debris. But James knew exactly where to look. The compartments behind the driver's seat. James explained to the rescue team, showing them the pages of the journal where Robert had drawn a small diagram. My dad was always careful with his important things. It took nearly 2 hours to find it. The impact had twisted the cab's frame, and the secret compartment Robert had carefully built was crushed among the tangled metal. When they finally reached it, James slid his hand inside with infinite care, feeling as though he were reaching through time to touch his father's hands. His fingers found something wrapped in plastic. Gently, he pulled out a small package that had survived untouched for 33 years. When he unwrapped it, he couldn't hold back the tears. It was just as Robert had described in his journal, a red remote-control truck with yellow, detailing the kind every kid in 1990 wanted for Christmas. "I found it," Dad James whispered, clutching the toy to his chest. "After all these years, I finally found it." Next to the toy was something else, a small box containing the silver earrings Robert had bought for Mary in San Diego. She'd never received them, but now James held them as a final love gift from his father to his mother. 3 weeks later, on May 15th, 2023, James finally laid Robert to rest beside Mary at the Mesquitan Cemetery. The service was small but deeply moving. Old friends from the trucking days came, some now gray-haired, each with a story to share about the young driver who'd always talked about his son. Joe, the same trucker who'd survived the robbery Robert had written about in his journal, came up to James, eyes brimming with emotion. "Your dad saved my life that night," he said in a trembling voice. "He took me to the hospital called. My family stayed with me until they arrived. He was a good man, James, a man of his word. Father Miguel Angel, the same priest who'd baptized Robert Jr., and Sophie led the service. Robert Henderson worked tirelessly for his family," he said during the homily. "His love didn't end with his life. Even now, 33 years later, he's still watching over you from wherever he is." The grandchildren Robert never met laid flowers on the grave. Sophie read a letter she'd written aloud. "Grandpa Mom always told us you were kind and hardworking. Thank you for taking care of Dad when he was little. And thank you for the money that's helping us go to school. I promise I'll be a good granddaughter. Robert Jr." His voice, already changing at 15, was more direct. "Grandpa, I want to be like you someday. I want to work hard and take care of my family the way you took care of yours." After the service, the family gathered at home for dinner. James had placed the remote control truck on a special shelf next to the photo of Robert in his trucker's uniform. Lisa had made red chili stew, Robert's favorite, according to Mary, and everyone shared stories about the man who'd finally come home after all these years. "Do you think Dad's at peace now?" Sophie asked, her eyes on her grandfather's picture. "Yes, sweetheart," James said, serving her more stew. "He's with your Grandma Mary now. He's finally home." That night, James dreamed of Robert for the first time in years. In the dream, his father stood next to the blue Kenworth, but this time it wasn't broken. It gleamed under the Los Angeles sun, and Robert smiled the same smile James barely remembered from his childhood. "You can rest now, son," Robert said in the dream. "You found me. You kept your promise." "What promise?" Dad James asked. "The one to never stop looking for me. The one to keep our story alive. Now take care of your family the way I tried to take care of mine." When James woke up, he knew the circle had closed. The search had ended, but the legacy was just beginning. The next day, using part of the money Robert had saved, James established the Robert Henderson Scholarship at California State University, dedicated to the children of truck drivers who wanted to study engineering or business. The first recipient was an 18-year-old girl whose father had disappeared on the road between Los Angeles and San Francisco 2 years before. Dad would have wanted this, James told Lisa as they signed the papers at the university, for his sacrifice to help others get the chances he wanted to give me. Robert Henderson had come home not just in body, but in spirit, turning his personal tragedy into hope for other families living with the same uncertainty the Henderson family had endured for 33 long years. Los Angeles, June 2023. 3 months after the discovery that forever changed the Henderson family's life, James stood in front of what had once been his small auto repair shop. Now a new polished sign gleamed above the door, Robert Henderson Trucking Specialists. The money his father had saved for years had finally fulfilled its purpose to give the family a better future. The story of the missing trucker had gone viral across social media, capturing the attention of the entire community. Local news outlets had picked it up, and soon families from all over Southern California started arriving with stories of their own. Truckers who had vanished without a trace, families who'd lived decades without answers, wives who still waited at the window hoping for a miracle. Mrs. Hannah Norris was the first to knock on the door of the shop. Her husband Raymond had disappeared back in 1995 on the road from Los Angeles to San Francisco, hauling a load of appliances. "Young man," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "You found your father after 33 years. Do you think there's still hope for mine?" That same week, more families came. The Gonzalezes, whose son had vanished in 2010 near Bakersfield. Mrs. Mendoza, searching for her brother who'd gone missing in 2003. Every story was different, but the pain was the same. The torment of not knowing what had happened to a loved one. James realized he had something far more powerful than just a repair shop. He had a responsibility to turn his family's story into hope for others. That's how Root of Hope was born, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families search for missing truckers. "We can't promise miracles," James told the gathered families at the first meeting held in the backyard of his home. "But we can do what the authorities sometimes can't: keep their stories alive, organize systematic searches, and never stop asking questions." Robert Jr. had quickly become his father's most dedicated helper. At just 15, he had already decided he'd study transportation engineering, determined to make America's highways safer for truckers. "I don't want any other family to go through what we did," he said during a local news interview on KABC Los Angeles. The young man had inherited not only his grandfather's name, but also his unshakable determination. He spent his afternoons at the shop learning about diesel engines and GPS tracking systems. "Grandpa never had this kind of technology," he'd say, studying the latest tracking devices, "but we do, and we're going to use it so no trucker ever goes missing again." Meanwhile, Sophie had started documenting the stories of the families who came to the shop. At just 13, she had already interviewed over 20 people, creating a digital archive of photos, testimonies, and details about the missing. "My grandpa was invisible for many years," she wrote in her award-winning essay for the state competition. "But his story taught us that no one really disappears as long as someone remembers them." The most emotional moment came when Joe the trucker, whom Robert had saved back in 1990, donated his own rig to be converted into a mobile search unit. "Your dad gave me a second chance at life," he said during the handover ceremony. "Now his son is going to give that same chance to other families." The trailer was retrofitted with communications equipment, digitized maps, and a small mobile forensic lab. On the sides, bold letters read, "Root of Hope, searching for our highway heroes." By October 2023, the organization had already achieved its first success. They'd found the remains of Raymond Norris, Mrs. Hannah's husband, in a ravine near Big Sur. He'd died in an accident, not an attack like everyone feared, but after 28 years of uncertainty, his family finally had answers. "It's not the news we hoped for," Mrs. Hannah said at her husband's funeral, "but at least now I know Raymond's at peace, and I can rest too." Robert Henderson's story had crossed borders. From California to Texas and beyond, truckers across America began sharing their own stories of missing brothers and fellow drivers who'd vanished without a trace. a national network of families slowly took shape, families connected by shared pain, but also by a common thread of hope. In December 2023, exactly 33 years after Robert disappeared, James chose to honor his father's memory in a very special way. The navy blue Kenworth was fully restored and transformed into a monument at the main entrance of Los Angeles at the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Figueroa Street. The plaque at its base read, "In memory of Robert Henderson and all the truckers who never made it home, your love continues to guide your families into the future." During the dedication, hundreds of truckers lined the street blaring their horns in a tribute that echoed through the city. Robert Jr. placed the remote control truck, his Christmas gift from long ago, inside a glass case at the base of the monument alongside the last photos of Robert with his family. If this incredible story of love, perseverance, and hope moved, you don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, and share it with everyone you know. Robert Henderson's journey had come to an end, but his legacy was just beginning. On highways across America, truckers now share his story like a legend, a testament to a father's love that defied even death, a reminder that no sacrifice made from love is ever truly lost in time.